Welcome to a new video. Today we're going to talk about the altcoins, and everything is currently focused surrounding the Bitcoin ETF, but there are also altcoins and some have been doing extremely well. Solana has been doing great. The entire ecosystem of Solana, Injective has been doing great. Now Arbitrum and Optimism are waking up. So what can we expect from the altcoin markets? That's what we're going to discuss in this update. But before we continue, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Make sure to follow me on the other platforms, X and Instagram. And also, if you are having a portfolio, if you want to build a portfolio, make sure to reach out towards our consultancy. We are there to assist you on a one-on-one assistance, building your portfolio and helping you through the cycle. So do that in the description beneath. Also, thank you for our sponsor, Bitfavo. I'm using Bitfavo as my go-to place for a smooth and simple process for investing purposes. I'm doing that for my swing trade portfolio, which consists of altcoins, of course, and they all have it on Bitfavo. It's the easiest to use exchange. It's the easiest to use broker as well, because I can transfer my money from the bank account towards crypto in one go. So therefore, if you start to trade, make sure to do that through an exchange that is easy and simple for you to understand, and that is Bitfavo, and can be used all across Europe. Now, when we talk about the Bitcoin ETF, I've been discussing it in the update yesterday. The update was a long one. If you did enjoy it, make sure to comment beneath to see what your view is on the Bitcoin ETF. But actually, given that everything is surrounded around the Bitcoin ETF, the other parts of the cryptocurrency ecosystem are not getting any attention at this point. And usually when that is the case, that is giving me an opportunity to swap the two. If you make the right decision at the right point. And sometimes you're too late or a little bit too early. But anyway, it makes a lot of sense, because you come to the conclusion that one of the two is overvalued or undervalued to the other one, or both. Which means that you can get an investment purpose or an investment strategy based out of that fact. So that is one topic. The second topic is the fact that altcoins have been running, and that's different than the past 2 years. We've had 1 year of downwards momentum and 1 year of accumulation. That in the lowest of upwards momentum, we saw that altcoins have seen a bounce, but they weren't that strong as what we're seeing right now. So are we going to see a continuation, or are we going to see a case of finishing the entire run? That's the question. But first, what are we expecting for the Bitcoin ETF at this point? I've been mentioning this a little bit already. I think that the most likely scenario at this stage is the fact that most upside is in. Still, if we get an approval, the actual event can push Bitcoin towards the highs, then we get a final push on the Bitcoin dominance chart, and then we start to consolidate. The range that I've designed here is a pure guess, but that's based out of the fact that we're witnessing this entire range previously as well. And usually when the markets are trying to trade into a block system or in blocks, they come back towards that block and use that block to an actual narrative to actually trade the markets, right? So if we have been trading in between these levels, we come back there, we take the liquidity there and need to test lower to make sure that we are actually finding support to get ourselves back into the markets. The question is, first, are we going to get here? And are we going to get here? So we still need to design the range. But this is more or less a view of how I think the markets are going to behave. Because in itself, the ETF is great. The halving is great. The impact of the halving is decreasing over time. But the impact is going to be positive on the long term. But doesn't mean that we need to consolidate a little bit and get back towards reality when it comes to Bitcoin. When we look at the markets, I think we are looking at a 4-year cycle still. Perhaps the last one. But it shows you some important factors, which is Bitcoin has seen this run at the start of 2016, right? In which we peaked in January 2016. It's January 2024. It's very similar to the price action. And then we started to consolidate before we did a final breakout pre-halving. I'm not sure whether we're going to get that, but the point is that a consolidation usually takes place. We saw it in the previous cycle as well. Now, what is the key point here? Is that Once this starts to run Bitcoin, and also in these parts, that is the moment when altcoins usually suffer in their BTC pairs. I'll discuss the topic about BTC pairs in a little bit. But given the fact that Bitcoin is going to slow down the volatility is usually a trigger that the markets are going to are a little bit overheated and are coming back into reality. And based on that fact, in the period of consolidation before breaking to new highs, that is the period where altcoins are going to do really well. And in that case, we need to look at Ether against USD. And I'll look at it from this perspective so we can start seeing it as well. This is what it has been doing in the previous cycle. It came from $5, it went to $1,400. We will see that again in the current cycle. So what we see here is, if you remind yourself, Bitcoin started to end off its run at the beginning of January. What happened after, this is the beginning of January, is the period where Ether starts to pick up momentum, and it rallied from $1 to 15. And then we just consolidated in seasonalities before we actually started to have a continuation of the run. So until March it was great, and then we consolidated before we started to have a massive bull cycle, as you can see, and we got into the stages of tremendous returns. And to be honest, I assume that the current cycle is going to be comparable to the previous to 2017 cycle. So I think that we're going to have the exact same. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that from this perspective, this consolidation, this is the moment where it started to shoot off. And that is the exact moment that Bitcoin started to cool down. So the money from Bitcoin flows into Ethereum, flows into other ecosystems as a result of Bitcoin finishing off its run. And that means that because Bitcoin finishes off its run, the money will go into other ones. And right now, there is such a big argument that if this week the Bitcoin ETF approval is going to take place, you will see money going into Ether, because Ether will also have a spot ETF. And if Ether is going to get momentum, the markets are going to get some momentum. That's also what you can see in the Bitcoin dominance chart, which in itself is currently showing a case of potentially peaking pre-halving. Perhaps we might be going up some more when it comes to the Bitcoin dominance chart, because next week is going to be tremendous for the Bitcoin ETF approval. So that is an argument that we can be making here if we get a little bit higher. Overall, ETH, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin dominance show the seasonality, right? So when we go back, we can see that Ether against Bitcoin started to shoot off from January, started to shoot off from December, did a rally in December and January as well. Did see the exact same in January 2020 here again. Did see the exact same in January 2021. So here we're going to get into the same nature, which means that we've got into a long downtrend, and being in a long downtrend since proof of stake has been confirmed shows that the sentiment around Ether is bad, the sentiment around Bitcoin is positive, but both are exaggerated on both sides, which means that there is a serious investment purpose of getting into Ether at these levels, and that it's going to reverse relatively soon. Probably it's going to take 1 to 2 weeks, but ultimately seasonality combined with the fact of the ETFs, combined with the fact of valuations, I think that this one is going to do really well. You can also see that Ether is just barely consolidating, and on the levels that we have been seeing for Bitcoin at 30k, and that there is still approximately 60% to gain before Ether is getting into the resistances that are comparable to the resistances that we have been seeing for Bitcoin at 48k. So how can you trade altcoins at this point, or how can you value altcoins properly? Well, if you look at the coins, then there are two important factors to take into account. You've got the USDT value, and the USDT value is against the dollar, of course. This is Solana, which shows you that there is a massive run to the upside. It came out of accumulation, started to rally, peaked out a little bit higher because it broke through this ultimate resistance zone and started to rally towards 125. Which is an important factor. So you can see that Solana is gaining value against USDT. Solana against Bitcoin is another chart to take into account. You can also do it against Ether. But I'm doing it against Bitcoin to show whether or not altcoins are showing momentum and whether they can continue showing that momentum. So Solana against Bitcoin is a valuation of Solana against Bitcoin. Why is this important? It is important because you can derive higher time frame support levels to buy from. They can differ between the two. And second, if an altcoin is running against USDT, and this is going to happen in the bull cycle, if it is running against USDT, it doesn't mean that the Bitcoin valuation is doing better or worse. So if the Bitcoin valuation starts to drop and the USDT value starts to rally, it means that Bitcoin is outperforming the actual asset. And usually that's what you're seeing when Bitcoin breaks the all-time high or breaks through highs. The altcoins will follow a USDT valuation, but they will lose momentum in Bitcoin. So you need to check whether an altcoin is starting an uptrend in the BTC valuation. And if it does, that's the moment when you get into the position if you see additional confirmations in the USDT pair as well. In this case, you can see that Solana is actually showing that big momentum in itself. And if you go towards something like Arbitrum, or Arbitrum against USDT, you can see that it's getting into a trajectory of price discovery as we just made a new all-time high. I've also mentioned for Arbitrum that a few levels are important to watch, which is the fact that during this entire upwards run, we've seen some beautiful retests, and I think ultimately we're going to have one here too, and actually we came quite close. But the point is that it's difficult to navigate through price discovery when the altcoin is running away in the USD valuation. And that's when you need to start figuring out the Bitcoin valuation. The Bitcoin valuation is still not making any trend at all in terms of breaking this high. But it is making higher lows, higher highs. So you're looking for a trend shift. As since the listing a year ago, Arbitrum has been making lower highs, lower lows. Now we are making higher lows, higher highs, through which you can start deriving information from this pair in the BTC pair to see that momentum is still there and that the momentum is strong in the actual altcoin because it is outperforming Bitcoin. All right. Same can be said on Chainlink. Chainlink has started an uptrend, but is still figuring out the crucial resistance and is getting into areas of the Bitcoin pair to find a support. And based on the fact that it's finding support in the Bitcoin pair, it is an interesting investment vehicle or investing thesis to go for. All right. So how can you trade altcoins at this point? I think there are three reasons or three ways that you can actually start trading altcoins. The first one is looking at higher time frames. So the difference between day trading and investing or swing trading, that's one. And I'm not going to talk about day trading altcoins at this point. I'm looking for an investment and swing trade purpose, as most of you are doing that. If an altcoin starts to run substantially, you need to identify important levels to find yourself into a trade. You can say, hey, on average, an altcoin is making a correction of 20 to 50% from the high being created. So what you can do is that you start buying in 20% less from the peak that it has been doing till 50%. All right, that's an option. Then you don't need to do any TA. You're just calculating for yourself, hey, if there is some volatility, I do this and this and this. All right. Now, if you look at Solana, for instance, if Solana is having this momentum, and you can see that the higher time frame levels are quite clear on the pair, it shows you that finding yourself into a higher time frame entry is based on a daily or weekly time frame, which is from 125 towards the areas of 85 towards 75, which is between that 20 to 50% correction. So if you have those rules in your trading thesis, it makes a lot of sense and it makes it more flexible for yourself. So the higher time frame levels are important to monitor and watch. And in this case, you're getting into one for Solana and you're looking for additional confirmations on the Bitcoin pair as well, which you can see that's still a little bit less. It's still around 20% lower, but we are getting there, which means that this one is most likely going to drop, but Bitcoin against USDT is most likely going to rally because of the ETF. Then you get yourself into the entry and then you're ready to go for a swap into the altcoins if Bitcoin is going to have a correction and that momentum is getting back into the altcoins. So that is the first way. The second way is that you need to look into altcoins that have not been moving at all. So what I mentioned, Solana is up a lot. Does it mean that that is going to be a great investment at this point? Or are you looking for altcoins that have not been moving that much in the Bitcoin pair? Some are still barely moving at all. I'm not sure whether Algo is going to have a breakout, but it shows you that there is still no run at all. Alright? The same can be said about many other altcoins. ENS, for instance, has just barely seen a slight breakout at all. It's still just starting up the actual uptrend, and uptrends usually take time. Alright, ENS has got a lot of hype at this point, given the fact that Vitalik is interested into it. So there is an investment thesis into this asset. But it just started an uptrend for the first time since October 2022. So what does it tell me? It tells me that I want to buy the dip on this one, and I want to look for approximately 10 to 20% lower, and then I'm definitely going to get a position, and I find the confluence in the BTC pair and the USDT pair, because the USDT pair is also on edge of starting to break through this entire trend, and you're looking for higher lows to get into the markets at this point. Alright? So that is something you need to do. Find the confluence between Bitcoin and USDT pairs. Find the higher time frame levels. And then the third one is there an opportunity cost? So for instance, if you have ENS, which barely did any upside, and you've got Solana, which did a 10x from the lows, and if you start to invest into altcoins, then you need to figure out which one is going to be doing the best. If Solana has been doing that already, what is the chance that that's going to give me a higher return than ENS? And ENS is just at the start of where Solana was 1 or 2 months ago. That is something you need to figure out yourself. So the key is to look for assets that are not in the spotlight at this point and would potentially be in the spotlight in the next few months and are just starting up their entire hype and momentum at this point. So those are 3 tips that I can give you when it comes to trading altcoins. Flipping back towards the entire ETF, my expectations are that we are going to get an approval for the Bitcoin ETF. I think that we're going to have a breakout to the upside, perhaps somewhere between 48 to 52. I think we fall back beneath, are going to consolidate and have a sideways period, then have another correction, after which we just go sideways and then the trend continues. In this period, I assume, and this is my most valid scenario, I assume that the markets are going to heat up. Chainlink, Ethereum ecosystem and more are going to do really well. This is going to be a harsh correction, but the altcoins and especially Ether, that's the one that you need to look for in the terms of the bounce. If it doesn't happen, of course, that tells us a lot as well. Everything is just an analysis and no confirmations yet. But if this is going to happen, I think you want to swap from Bitcoin to Ether. If you want to do it the right way, make sure to reach out towards us. But that's what I'm looking for at this point when it comes to the markets. I think that Bitcoin is skewed to the upside and that is going to have a consolidation, and that consolidation is going to give the markets a lot of momentum. And I think that most altcoins have barely seen any move and are ready for continuation overall. I hope you have been enjoying this update. I'll be back next week with 2 more updates on Bitcoin and altcoins. Hopefully we're going to get the ETF approval. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to follow me on other social media platforms. And I'll see you again soon. Ciao.